This story was sent to me by Sarah Mitchell via email. I was crouched behind a parked car, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away, watching as this man slowly walked between the houses with something metallic glinting in his hand. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. It was the second week of July, one of those sweltering summer nights where the heat doesn't break even after sunset. I was 17 and staying at my aunt's house in this quiet suburban neighborhood outside Phoenix while my parents were going through their divorce. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by similar cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns and privacy fences. My aunt worked night shifts at the hospital, so most evenings I had the place to myself. That particular night, around 11 p.m., I was sitting on the back patio trying to catch any breeze that might cut through the oppressive heat. The air was thick and still, with that electric feeling you get before a storm that never comes. I had my earbuds in, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed the motion sensor light in the neighbor's backyard kept flickering on and off. At first, I figured it was just a stray cat or maybe a raccoon, but the pattern seemed too deliberate, too regular. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. That's when I heard it, the soft scraping sound of someone moving through the gravel between the houses. The sound would stop for a few seconds, then start again, like someone was being very careful about where they stepped. I turned off my phone's screen and sat perfectly still, straining to see into the darkness between the houses. The motion light triggered again, and this time I saw him clearly. A tall figure in dark clothing, moving methodically from yard to yard, checking windows and doors. He had something in his hand that caught the light. Later I realized it was probably a crowbar or pry bar. He wasn't rushing or acting panicked, like someone who was lost or confused. His movements were purposeful, practiced. My blood went cold when I realized he was working his way toward my aunt's house. I was completely alone, and the nearest neighbor was at least 50 yards away. My phone was dead silent. My aunt always kept it on vibrate during her shifts, and I had no way to contact her quickly. I watched as he approached the next door house, testing the sliding glass door, peering through windows. That's when I made what could have been a fatal mistake. Instead of going inside and locking the doors, I crept closer to get a better look, thinking maybe I could get his license plate number or a better description for the police. I slipped around the side of the house using the air conditioning unit for cover. He was at my neighbor's back door now, working at the lock with his tool. I could hear the soft, metallic scraping as he manipulated something in the door frame. The family next door had left for vacation just 2 days earlier. Their newspapers were piling up, and they'd asked my aunt to water their plants. He must have been watching, waiting for the perfect opportunity. I was fumbling with my phone trying to dial 911 when my finger accidentally hit the flashlight button. For just a split second, a bright beam of light shot out before I could turn it off. But it was enough. He saw it. Our eyes met across maybe 20 feet of darkness, and I've never felt terror like that before or since. He didn't run or panic. He just stared at me with this cold, calculating expression, like he was deciding what to do next. Then he started walking toward me, not hurrying, just this steady, inevitable approach. I ran. I vaulted over the fence into another neighbor's yard, my bare feet slapping against the hot concrete as I sprinted through their backyard. I could hear him behind me, not running, but walking fast, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. He was following me, and somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd been chasing me at full speed. I ducked behind a parked truck and tried to control my breathing. The neighborhood was dead quiet except for the hum of air conditioners and the distant sound of his footsteps. I peeked around the truck and saw him moving between the houses, methodically checking each potential hiding spot. He wasn't giving up. That's when I remembered the Hendersons' house had a dog door. They were friends of my aunt's, and I'd pet sat for them before. I knew their German Shepherd was staying at a kennel while they were out of town. If I could get inside, I could call the police from their landline and wait for help in a locked house. I waited until he moved to the other side of the cul-de-sac, then sprinted across 3 backyards to reach their fence. The dog door was just big enough for me to squeeze through, though I scraped my shoulders raw in the process. Once inside, I locked every door and window I could find, then called 911 from their kitchen phone. The police arrived within minutes, but by then he was gone. They found evidence that he'd successfully broken into the neighbor's house and taken several pieces of electronics and jewelry. The officer told me I was lucky. This guy had been hitting houses all summer, always choosing homes where the families were away on vacation. He'd been watching neighborhoods, learning patterns, waiting for opportunities. What still haunts me is how patient he was, how calculated. He didn't panic when he saw me. He didn't run when he realized he'd been spotted. He just adapted his plan and tried to eliminate the witness. The police caught him 2 weeks later during another break-in. But those 20 minutes of being hunted through my own neighborhood changed how I see the world. Every shadow could hide someone with bad intentions, and summer nights will never feel safe to me again.
I found this on a Reddit thread by user MidnightCamper91. The smell hit me first, something rotten and sweet drifting through the pine trees as I crawled out of my tent to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found at the edge of our campsite. But let me back up and tell you how this camping trip turned into the worst night of my life. My college roommate Jake and I had planned this camping trip to Glacier National Park for months. We were both city kids from Chicago, but Jake had been camping since he was little and kept insisting I needed to experience real wilderness before we graduated. It was late August, one of those perfect summer nights where the temperature drops just enough after sunset to make sleeping outdoors comfortable. We'd hiked about 6 miles off the main trail to reach this secluded spot Jake had found on some camping forum. No designated campgrounds, no other people for miles, just us, the forest, and what Jake promised would be incredible stargazing. The hike in had been beautiful, following a creek through dense pine forest, but as daylight faded, the isolation started to feel less romantic and more unsettling. We set up our tents about 20 feet apart in a small clearing beside the creek. Jake insisted on the distance, claiming it would give us each privacy and reduce the chance of bears being attracted to a large concentration of human scent. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. I wished later that we'd pitched our tents right next to each other. The first few hours were exactly what Jake had promised. We built a small fire, cooked dinner over the flames, and watched the Milky Way emerge as the sky darkened completely. By 10 p.m., we were both exhausted from the hike and decided to turn in early. Jake was snoring within minutes, but I lay awake listening to all the forest sounds I wasn't used to. Owls calling, small animals wrestling through the underbrush, the constant whisper of wind through the pine needles. Around midnight, I heard Jake's tent zipper. I figured he was getting up to use the bathroom, but then I heard his voice, very quiet and tense. "Hey, do you smell that?" I unzipped my tent and stuck my head out. That's when the smell hit me. Definitely something dead and decomposing, but with an underlying chemical sweetness that made my stomach turn. Jake was standing by the dying fire, holding his flashlight, but not turning it on. "It's coming from over there," he whispered, pointing toward the tree line about 50 yards from our campsite. "And it's getting stronger." He was right. What had been a faint odor was becoming overwhelming, like someone was dragging roadkill closer and closer to our campsite. We stood there in the darkness, afraid to use our lights, but straining to see into the forest. The smell was so strong now that I had to breathe through my mouth. Then we heard something that made my blood freeze. A low, wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. "That's not an animal," Jake whispered. "Animals don't drag dead things around like that." He was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the fear in his voice. We'd both been thinking the same thing. Someone was out there, in the darkness, and they had something dead with them. The dragging sound stopped maybe 30 feet from our camp. We couldn't see anything in the darkness, but we could hear breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone who had been working hard. Then a voice called out from the blackness, rough and slurred, like the person had been drinking or was mentally unstable. "I know you're there. I can smell your fire. I got something here you might want to see." The voice was followed by a wet thump, like something being dropped. The smell got even worse, so putrid that I gagged and had to step away from where the voice was coming from. Jake grabbed my arm and pulled me toward his tent. "Pack up, now, as quietly as possible." We started stuffing our sleeping bags and gear into our backpacks, trying not to make any noise, but in the dead silence of the forest, every zipper and rustling fabric seemed impossibly loud. "Don't be unsociable," the voice called again, closer this time. "I brought you a present. Found it about 2 miles downstream. Been saving it for someone special." The wet, dragging sound started again, definitely moving toward our campsite. That's when Jake made a decision that probably saved our lives. Instead of trying to sneak away through the forest in complete darkness, he grabbed both our packs and his car keys. "The trailhead. We run for the trailhead. Right now." He turned on his flashlight and swept it toward the voice. In the beam of light, we saw a figure crouched behind a fallen log, but what made us both scream was what lay in front of him. The rotting carcass of what looked like a deer, but it had been cut up and arranged in ways that were clearly deliberate and disturbing. The person behind the log was holding something that glinted metallic in the flashlight beam. We ran. 6 miles of trail in complete darkness, guided only by Jake's flashlight and the occasional glimpse of reflective trail markers. We could hear him following for the first mile, crashing through the underbrush and calling after us, sometimes laughing, sometimes making sounds that weren't quite human. By the time we reached Jake's car at the trailhead, we were both bleeding from branches and completely exhausted. We drove straight to the ranger station and told them everything. They found our abandoned campsite the next morning, but whoever had been out there was gone. They did find evidence that someone had been living rough in that area for weeks, a crude shelter made from branches and tarps, along with the remains of several animals that had been killed and mutilated in ways that served no practical purpose. The ranger who took our report told us we weren't the first campers to report encounters with this person. Someone had been stalking remote campsites all summer, apparently getting off on terrorizing people who were isolated and vulnerable. They never caught him, and I've never been camping since. Jake sold all his gear the week after we got back to Chicago. Some experiences change you fundamentally, and that night taught me that true wilderness includes human predators who are far more dangerous than any bear or mountain lion.
Someone DM'd me this on Twitter. I was pressed against the bathroom door, my phone battery at 2%, listening to footsteps pacing back and forth outside the beach house while a man's voice kept calling my name through the walls. But let me back up and tell you how a perfect summer beach trip turned into a nightmare that still gives me panic attacks.
It was the first week of September, technically still summer, but after Labor Day when most of the tourist crowds had gone home. My best friend Megan and I had rented this cute little beach house on the Outer Banks for what we called our summer finale weekend. We were both starting graduate school in 2 weeks, so this was our last chance for a carefree beach vacation before real adult responsibilities kicked in. The house was perfect, one of those weathered cedar shingled cottages about a quarter-mile from the main beach, surrounded by dunes and seagrass with no other houses visible. We loved the isolation. After months of cramped city living, the idea of having miles of empty beach to ourselves felt like pure luxury. The rental agent had mentioned that most of the seasonal houses in this area emptied out after Labor Day, leaving just a few year-round residents scattered along the coast. We spent Friday and most of Saturday exactly like we'd planned, sleeping late, reading on the beach, drinking wine on the deck as the sun set over the dunes. Saturday night, we decided to drive into town for dinner and drinks at this local bar that stayed open year-round for the locals. It was a 20-minute drive on winding coastal roads, but we figured it would be fun to experience the authentic local scene. The bar was exactly what you'd expect: weathered wood, fishing nets on the walls, and a crowd of locals who all seemed to know each other. We were clearly outsiders, but most people were friendly enough. We played pool, danced to the jukebox, and chatted with various locals about the best beaches and restaurants in the area. That's when I met him. He introduced himself as Danny, said he was a local fisherman who'd grown up in the area. Mid-30s, decent looking, seemed harmless enough. He bought us a few drinks and told stories about growing up on the coast. When he found out where we were staying, he got really interested, asking specific questions about which house, how long we were there, whether we were traveling alone. At the time, it just seemed like normal small talk. I was a little tipsy and flattered by the attention. When he offered to show us some secret local beaches the next day, I actually gave him my number. Megan was more suspicious. She pulled me aside and said something felt off about how intensely he was questioning us. But I brushed off her concerns. We left the bar around midnight and drove back to the house. The coastal road was completely dark except for our headlights, and we didn't see another car the entire way. We were both tired and a little drunk, so we went straight to bed without bothering to lock the doors. I know that sounds stupid now, but the house felt so isolated and safe. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of gravel crunching outside. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but the sound was too regular, too purposeful. Someone was walking around the house, slowly and deliberately, like they were checking all the windows and doors. I lay in bed trying to convince myself I was imagining things, but then I heard the soft squeak of the front door opening. We'd left it unlocked, and someone was coming inside. I could hear footsteps moving through the living room, very careful and quiet, like they were trying not to wake us up. I grabbed my phone and tried to wake Megan, but her room was on the other side of the house. I texted her frantically, but she didn't respond. She was probably passed out from the alcohol. The footsteps were moving down the hallway now, stopping outside each bedroom door. Then I heard his voice, just outside my room. "I know you're awake in there. We had such a nice conversation at the bar. I just wanted to continue our talk." It was Danny, but his voice sounded different, slurred and aggressive, nothing like the friendly fisherman from the bar. I realized I was trapped. My room was on the second floor with no way to climb down safely, and he was standing right outside my door. I locked the door as quietly as possible and backed into the bathroom, which had a separate lock. My phone was almost dead, but I managed to dial 911. The N11 operator told me police were on their way, but it would take at least 20 minutes to reach our location. 20 minutes of being trapped while this man roamed through the house. I could hear him trying my door handle, then moving to Megan's room. I heard her scream, then her voice pleading with him to leave us alone. "I just want to talk," he kept saying, but there was something in his tone that made it clear he wanted much more than conversation. You girls came to my town, flirted with me, gave me your number. Now you want to play hard to get? For the next 15 minutes, I listened to him moving through the house, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes calling out to us. He'd found a bottle of our wine and was drinking it while he waited, getting more aggressive and incoherent as time passed. At one point, he tried to break down my bathroom door, throwing his weight against it while I pressed back from the other side. The worst part was listening to him talking about what he planned to do, how we had led him on and now owed him. He'd clearly done this before. He knew exactly how isolated the house was, how long it would take police to arrive, how helpless we were. When I finally heard sirens in the distance, he panicked. I heard him run through the house, probably grabbing whatever evidence he could, then the sound of a car starting up and speeding away on the gravel road. The police found Megan locked in her closet, unharmed but terrified. They found evidence that he'd been watching the house earlier, footprints around all the windows, cigarette butts in the dunes nearby. The police told us that Danny wasn't his real name, and he wasn't actually a local fisherman. He was a drifter who targeted tourist areas, specifically looking for young women traveling alone or in small groups. He'd been operating along the coast all summer, using the same approach: befriend tourists at bars, find out where they're staying, and then show up later when they're isolated and vulnerable. They never caught him. We left the beach house that morning and drove straight home, cutting our vacation short. The rental agency offered us a partial refund but seemed more concerned about their reputation than our safety. I've never stayed in an isolated rental again, and I'm much more careful about sharing personal information with strangers when I travel. That night taught me that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who seem the most normal.